Hey, Lydia, I'm delighted that we have a few minutes to talk. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Um, you have an amazing background, but a really interesting background. I mean, I think you studied a business degree and a law degree, and actually experienced working in law firms, and then you grew up in investment banking and was managing director of a global investment bank for a number of years, and worked in capital markets and areas that are really kind of technical and pretty challenging sort of work environments in many instances, and so on. And then I know you also have a passion for astrology, which is always curious to me. And most recently, you've gone back to school and studied and achieved a master's degree in coaching psychology. It's a completely different sort of side of things. And I know one of your passions is purpose, and like, what are we really here for? And be really interested to sort of know a little bit more about, like, how did you get to this point? I mean, it's quite a journey, isn't it? And here you are. So, like, how did this come to be, Lydia?
Look, it is an interesting kind of journey, and certainly having lived it, I can tell you it's been interesting. So, look, the business and law degree, they were really just because that was where my interest lay at the time, and I really wasn't sure about what direction I would head in, whether I would move towards the law or use my business degree. And as it turned out, I actually did leave university and work for two of the big six law firms. And I quickly worked out when I was there that I just wasn't feeling particularly motivated. And that was quite unlike me. And I'd be leaving work, going home thinking, God, I had this really heavy feeling that, what lay ahead of me wasn't particularly appealing. And that's no judgment at all about that industry or that field. It's just that I and it were not the right fit. So I had this awareness. And serendipitously, a friend that I'd studied business with called me and asked me if I would be interested in interviewing for the firm that he was at, which was a stockbroking firm. And the role was a research and analytical role. And, that skill really appealed to me, that area of research really appealed to me. So I guess, fortunately for me, I, attended the interview, got the job, and then, enjoyed a 25-year career in finance as a result. And I had a wonderful career. I loved it. It was so challenging, very dynamic. There was just no 2 days were the same. And I think that's the other thing, that when I look back, I can understand, I didn't know it at the time, but I know now that it's that kind of dynamic environment that I really enjoy and I thrive in. So yeah, my career in finance kind of led me through. I started out as a research analyst. I moved into an advisory role, and I specialized in an area of the market, which was all companies outside of the top 100 listed stocks, and that's called the Small Companies Index. It was at the time the ASX Small Companies. And what that kind of exposed me to was, in a public market context, the highest growth, most innovative and most entrepreneurial companies in the listed space. And obviously there are companies that are constantly coming through that are private, wanting to go public. And so some of those that were in the private space that were growing at a sufficient enough rate were sizable enough to become listed companies. And so that also exposed me to some pretty incredible leaders. And, in the context of my role then, identifying a leader that was authentic, relatable, highly motivated, extremely capable, and could galvanize an organization around purpose, distilled into stock price and ability to raise capital, or ability to actually IPO the business. But in and around all of that context of my then role, I was becoming really, really curious about the psychology of success, is probably how I kind of distill it.
Mm-hmm.
And, one small little anecdote was we listed Domino's Pizza, and the CEO, Don Mage, I mean, this man was absolutely on fire with a passion for what he wanted to bring to Australia, to the world, right? And it's not like the world hadn't ever seen takeaway pizza before, but something about him and his vision, the degree of motivation was really fascinating to me. And it wasn't just Don. I mean, he had gathered around himself highly motivated, highly capable, passionate people, and very relatable, very authentic, very aligned. And so, this kind of sparked the curiosity. And I think, as following that trajectory across the various roles that I then performed, I moved into the actual investment banking function in equity capital markets. I then, after leaving the investment banking world, I then was part of a small boutique advisory firm in the equity capital market space. We raised, help companies go public and raise capital. And so I started to become even more curious about what is it that distinguishes, the best leaders, the best companies. And I think that really bridged me into wanting to formally study positive psychology and doing the masters at Sydney Uni, and hence the passion for coaching. Interwoven in the background, there was always an interest in astrology. I can say that, as a teenager, late teens, through my 20s, I was always reading and interested. And I got to a point in my career where I had this opportunity, this moment where I had scope for part-time study. And to be honest, I decided I was going to study it to find out if there was anything to it. Almost not as though I approached it thinking there wasn't, but I was sort of open-minded, and I thought, look, I can finally put this to rest. I'll just go and study it and find out. So I did, and by the time I'd finished the diploma, I realized that astrology was a very, very powerful tool when used appropriately for developing self-awareness and for personal growth, and for making sense of some of the patterns and habits that we form, and just the things that we find ourselves coming back around to and saying, oh, here I am again. How did I get back here? And so the other thing that in the end that really kind of resonated with me about astrology was that the underlying premise is that we're all born to a purpose, and that doesn't mean one specific thing. It means this broader context within which we find ourselves having this affinity, and so therefore we find ourselves wanting to be engaged with certain activities over others, and that then defines a course and a direction and the choices that we find ourselves taking, because we have an attraction to working creatively or working in data and analysis. And so that then sat in the background of me being curious about, so if we're bestowed with certain gifts and strengths and we're here to use them in a particular way, how can people be their best by having some awareness around these things? And so interestingly, the astrology and the psychology almost overlap.
They knit together quite well, don't they? Yeah, very, very interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I really like the way you talked about patterns. I mean, you've written a really great paper recently that'll be made available in conjunction with this as well, about think the title's about, rebooting and the GPS and so on. But one of the really interesting ideas that you talk about in that is a pattern where we as human beings are almost in two states continuously, which is either moving away from something or towards something, right? Sort of, but we're not still. And, here we are, approaching the end of lockdown in New South Wales, this, 20 odd protracted months of chaos that has been COVID and the uncertainty of what lays ahead and so on. I mean, how do you sort of reconcile what's happening for us as human beings, and the patterns that we're forming, and think about, the environment that we're having, the impact that's having on this idea about either moving away from something or moving towards something? Have you drawn any conclusions on that so far?
Yeah, look, I think it's helpful to first of all start with trying to distill, into a statement, what is this moment? What is this context? Obviously, it's very different for all of us, different lived lives, lived experiences, different work situations, work contexts. But I think if I had to summarize this moment, and when I say this moment, I kind of mean, the last, 18, 20 months, I would describe it as a shared experience in what it means to not be in control. And humans like to feel in control. And when we're not, it creates a lot of anxiety, fear, doubt, and uncertainty. And I'd say that that's how I see the layers of this lived experience, right? This shared moment of not having control. And that not having control appears for each of us in different ways. Kids can't go to school. I can't work the way I usually do. My work needs to take on this form, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Many different examples of it. But let's just say the essence of it is this, component of not having control. And so because we are goal-oriented beings, humans, right? Whether we realize it or not, mostly we're unconscious of it. Your decision to go and get a glass of water is, in the language of psychology, is a goal to go and get some water. And so you set up the thought process, the goal, and the actions you'll take to achieve that. That's just an unconscious goal, but one that we, would have many times in a day. So, if we take this and we expand it out, there are many, many goals that we would have, mostly unconscious. When we're feeling anxious, when we're surrounded by uncertainty, we may actually unconsciously set up goals to control things, small things even, just so that we can alleviate that feeling of discomfort. Our goal, therefore, is to move away from the discomfort.
Yeah.
And so in the context, when we're thinking about, people in their working lives, it can be a frustrating time for some people because they've got this feeling of just spinning their wheels. They're doing lots, they're becoming exhausted, but they're not achieving much. And it's, sometimes that can simply be because to alleviate the discomfort, to alleviate the uncertainty, we'll do things that give us that tempting feeling of control, but they may not actually be aligned with some medium-term objective or goal that you would otherwise like to achieve. We kind of get distracted and distanced from holding on to those things that actually would make us feel more happy, satisfied, fulfilled, etc.
Well, maybe it's another example of the pattern that you referred to before, which is, like everybody's clicking, busy, meeting, call. Like there's a cadence to the 21st century executive life right around the place. And that becomes a pattern, and maybe it has become a little bit unconscious. So like, we deal with very senior people, living busy, and working in stressful environments, trying to do heroic things, So with those people in mind, what do you suggest? how do these people sort of, what's that strategy to sort of help to manage and mediate the sort of scenario that you're describing?
So, there's no doubt that, there's tricky terrain to be, navigated when, we're in a moment such as we're in now. So, no one ever wants to diminish that. But I think it's, I find that having a conversation around, and I use the metaphor, finding high ground, and it's a metaphor. And I kind of work it through, with the executives that I'm engaged with, in kind of two ways, right? So as a metaphor, there's a physical and a mental way about thinking about getting to higher ground. So the physical representation can literally be moving yourself to another place that enables you to get some distance, physical distance, from whatever it is that's ailing you, frustrating, or has you frozen. So that could be get out for a walk and shift your physical space so that you can get some distance upon that which is, the source of concern. The other shift is the mental shift. So when we say getting to higher ground, when we make a mental shift, what's happening is we're moving again to a place where we can create some distance and objectivity. So the physical and mental shift is all about being able to re-perceive your issue. And so through that re-perceiving, we can see things differently. We can start to notice something about that context and perhaps make some informed choices about what we want to stay with, if there's anything there, and what we want to move away from. But this movement now is actually then taking in a new perspective about how can this challenge be reframed as an opportunity. When we reframe things like that, we invite the opportunity to make higher choices, higher being more creative choices, more conscious choices. And then we can start to move into the next phase of what high ground means. And that's a more emotional and, if you like, spiritual phase, okay, of what we want to move towards, okay? And so the once we've gotten the distance of where we're looking at the issue, we can then sort of say, okay, well, what is it that I don't want about that? So what do I want? And so the next phase is, this elevation, higher ground elevates us. So I'm going to be elevated by things that inspire me. What actually does inspire me, and what do I aspire to? And, here we get into the terrain of, bigger questions. What do I want my life to represent? What is it about life and work that really engages me, that makes me feel deeply fulfilled? So for some people that might be, I love learning. I need to work in a way where I'm constantly learning. Or I love relating and connecting. I need to work in a way in which I'm feeling connected. I love being creative. I need to work in a way that draws that from me. So we're getting to this elevated plane and this kind of more inspired and aspirational statements. And once we've got this overarching kind of frame, then we can start to drop down into, well, why is it important that you live a life where you're constantly learning? What is it about learning that matters to you? So we get value statements. Well, learning is important to me because I think that, being informed, is something that, I enjoy. Or, learning is important because I feel as though I'm stimulated by learning new things. Whatever the statement is, there's value statements that drop down from that overarching aspiration. Once we start to get those value statements, then we can start to craft specific goals that are aligned with you achieving those things or having those things. And that then sets up this framework for creating some movement and direction around which you can confront the choices of the day and have some organizing principle around what you'll engage with, and also what you need to ensure you are engaging with if you're going to meet those medium-term objectives. So it sort of helps to just, I like to, liken it to having a GPS system and helping you therefore orient your way through, what would otherwise be distracting terrain that isn't necessarily in aid of you, achieving goals or achieving a life that feels, entirely satisfying.
So Lidia, some brilliant ideas there, and I love the way you've separated the physical from the mental, even the spiritual. Wow, that's spooky for us executives. But if you had to sort of, so again, we're dealing with busy executives trying to achieve great things. So can you summarize this into what are the sort of maybe 3 big takeaways from this that you think, if an exec has clicked on this, what could they take away and do today, if you will?
Yeah. So look, I think, the first thing is to just recognize that when we are not in a state of feeling in control, that it's very tempting to engage in behaviors or things or be doing purely to dial down the volume on the feelings of discomfort that arise when we feel that way. Okay. And so the first thing would be to just simply scrutinize what you're doing. And if what you're doing is aligned with those medium-term objectives, then great, you're on course, you're on track. But if it's not and it's frustrating you, then that's your first pause moment. Okay. That's your pause moment. You sort of go, okay, some of what is frustrating me is part of just the day-to-day, meat and potatoes of work. And some of it is me avoiding. Some of it is me kidding myself I have control. And so what do I need to do about that? So then the next step would be, do what you need to do in what form feels right for you to get some perspective, whether it's physical distance, taking that walk, going to a different, park or whatever it is that, or, environment you've been putting yourself in to take those walks. Do something different and reflect on what it is that's happening that isn't really aligned with where you want to be going. And so then the next thing, I guess that would be step 2. Yeah. And then step 3 would be using those opportunities where you are perhaps in a different physical environment to then link into thinking about, well, what do you actually want? Moments like these where some of the cards, have been thrown up in the air, they're opportunities. And they can be opportunities to realign or reset. Yeah. And I guess the final point, the final takeaway I would say is absolutely, you made the great point about, there's a cadence to executive life of, tap, tap, tap and, calls and Zoom and, everything that's going on. And I guess I just want to also introduce this additional concept that sometimes in aligning with a sense of purpose and aligning with all that drops down from that sense as to what one either, would like to be doing or would like to be doing more of, there can be moments in that course which are just moments that are pause moments. There's so much focus on human doing that sometimes even in the context of purpose and aligning ourselves with that, there are moments of pause. And the moment might just be, this is a planning time. This is a resetting time. This is a time to be creative around what I can do. Yeah. So that may look outwardly like you're not doing much, but inwardly, there's a lot of reorientation going on, and that is still quite valuable in the context of moving towards these medium-term goals. So it's not just this outward, manifestation of more stuff, more things to do. Sometimes the doing is actually the, reperceiving, the recontextualizing, the planning, and the resetting.
Yeah. As you're talking there, I was thinking about, many of us were really good at, creating to-do lists, and there's a never-ending list of to-dos. And perhaps what you're saying is actually we need to also use this moment and pause and think about what should be on the to-be list. How do we want to be at this time as well, and into the future, and just maybe use this as a great point of reflection to perhaps recalibrate or not, but take the moment to at least consider it. So
yeah,
Lidia, I feel like we could be talking all day. There's just so much, and every time I talk to you, I walk away and go, wow, there's something I must do. That was really, really, really helpful. And I'm sure people who see this will also feel the same way. So thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversations, and I've learned a heap, and I hope busy execs can take away those 3 and actually 4 great final messages that you concluded with. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.